the things I think about a lot is some of the barriers to electric bike ownership. I think a lot of people want to have electric bike, they want to use it in their life, but there are certain things that limit them. One of the things is parking, but probably one of the biggest things is price. In other countries where electric bikes are a lot more common, other places I should say, Europe is one of them, they have certain programs that make it easier. One of them is leasing. That's something that hasn't really come to the US so much, but we've been working with some people on that concept, and I think that we will see that in the future, and I think that's going to change things quite a bit, especially when you pair leasing with maybe some employee programs and that sort of thing. But today I wanted to specifically talk about rebates. Now, as many of you might know, there's a lot of rebates for electric cars, and I think that that's helped to increase the adoption in many places, especially places like California, where electric cars are everywhere these days. But there's also the infrastructure in place, charging, etc. But the thing is, so there's rebates for electric cars, but there's not really many rebates for electric bikes. There's a couple here and there that you see throughout the states, but in some ways you would think that places would want to encourage that maybe even more than electric cars. I mean, it puts less stress on the infrastructure that costs so much to build. It's a lot better for the environment. It's healthier for people. Yeah, so the car industry has all sorts of benefits that the electric bike industry doesn't really have. I mean, it's a lot larger. They have a lot more industries that kind of depend on it, and there's a lot of subsidies around that, whether it's oil or infrastructure for cars and that sort of thing. So because this is a new industry and a new category, I guess you could say, I think that it's not really considered all the time. It's definitely become a hot topic as ridership has been up so significantly, especially in this last couple months to the year, due to coronavirus and that sort of thing. I think there's more awareness there, and there are organizations that help to advocate for these things, but there's not quite as many as there are in other industries. So how do we create this change? I mean, we really have to depend on our local politicians and advocate for that. We had participated, I think, last year in helping to advocate for this bill, SB 400 in California, and this was a cash for clunkers program. Basically, the idea is that you can trade in an old car that's not energy efficient, has bad emissions or whatever, and historically you can trade that in, you can get a credit to put towards an electric car. But what they did with this SB 400 bill was expand that to electric bicycles and other forms of human scale transportation. You can use it for bike share. You can also use it for transit trips, like getting a train pass, that sort of thing. But that's pretty limiting, actually. It's one, you need to already have a car. Two, it's only in specific areas where they have clean air issues, which the reality is we have clean air issues throughout the whole country, but it needs to be at a certain level in order to qualify, and there's all this sort of red tape. I started going through it and I was just like, what's even the point here? I think we need just a simple system as it is really for electric cars. And so this is the idea. What actually brought up this idea specifically is there's a bill that was recently introduced by this assembly member, Robert Carroll, in New York City, that is set to do this exactly, expand the electric car rebate program to include electric bikes. And currently, I think the electric car rebate program goes up to $2,000, and the electric bike rebate program, they want to set this to provide 50% of the cost of the bike up to $1,100. I know that some bikes can be quite a bit more expensive than $2,200, but I think that $1,100 is pretty significant. That could be really helpful to you. The idea that you can get a $2,200 bike for $1,100 is pretty nice. And I think it makes sense. So in New York State, they have this electric car rebate program that's been going on for a couple of years, and it gives $2,000. Historically, it's actually given quite a bit more. But in New York City, where car ownership is so low, but the population is so high, this program actually doesn't benefit this large percentage of New York State, the residents of New York State. So that's the idea, that this assembly member, and along with several co-sponsors, wants to introduce this bill to expand the program. I mean, when you think about it, they recently clarified a lot of the laws around electric bikes. Since then, we've seen a lot more of them on the roads, especially in New York City, where it just makes a lot of sense. We have this limitation, they cost money. Not everybody has the financial means to afford one, or afford a quality one for that matter. So to have this program, I think it's really helpful, and especially if you can pair that with maybe some additional programs, we're getting somewhere. They have $2,000 for electric cars, and then $1,100 or up to $1,100 for the purchase of electric bike. It's 50% of the purchase price up to $1,100. So if it's a $3,000 bike, you're not going to get $1,500, you just get $1,100. If it's a $1,500 bike, you're just going to get $750. So I think it's a good program. I hope that it goes through. You might be wondering, what can I do? If you live in New York City, I would recommend, or really New York State for that matter, because this is a state program, contact your assembly members and really encourage them to vote yes on this. The bill number specifically is A10974. You can look it up. We'll put a link below for that. But I think that overall we'll probably see similar things in other states throughout the country. I think now that we have more clear legislation around electric bikes, I mean, you couldn't really do this before there was legislation around electric bikes. And I know that some of these other programs, like in New York, they have this thing called NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Resource Board. We actually had some meetings with them when we were lobbying for the electric bike bill, and they have all these other grant programs, etc. And the idea is that the money's there, the resources are there, and it's just a matter of distributing them appropriately. I would argue that distributing them towards electric bikes as opposed to electric cars probably makes a lot more sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense for everybody, so don't get me wrong. I understand if somebody's situation is not such that they have the appropriate bike infrastructure, or maybe their commute is too long that it doesn't really make sense. Maybe an electric car does make sense. So I think we're going to see more and more of these programs roll out across the country. I mean, probably in the simplest form, it's probably going to be just an expansion of the electric car rebate program, because as far as I understand and what I know about the way that these political things work, it's easier to expand a program than to create a new one. So it's just kind of a modification of the existing program. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and hopefully they go in that direction, because that'll help them to roll it out a little bit faster. But we have seen, some of these programs in smaller forms from some of the power companies. Like Austin had one. It was like a couple $100 from the Austin, Texas Power Authority, or whatever it is. I think Vermont had one as well. And then occasionally you see some other smaller ones. I was actually doing some research, and there's a report that specifically came out in 2019, and they highlighted a lot of the programs actually throughout the world. Some of the biggest ones were in Europe. So Sweden, actually, they dedicated $118 million, or at least that equivalent in their currency, towards a program where I think they gave up to $1,000 for electric bikes. And that was one that was pretty notable. Oslo, Norway did one as well, and I think it was $1,200. I mean, people talked about it a lot. I mean, I remember hearing, I was like, oh yeah, I wish that we can get that here. I think that would be really good. I mean, to be clear, I own a bike shop. I own a couple of bike shops. I'm in the business, so yeah, I would directly benefit from this, because I think that more people would buy electric bikes. But I think overall, this is just like more of a discussion on what it's going to take in order to increase the use of electric bikes, make them more commonplace, potentially make them more accessible to more people, which I really like that idea. I just want to highlight a couple more of the programs that have happened, and then I'll link some of the resources below so you can check that out for yourself if you want to learn more about how these programs work. That study that was done by the Transportation Research and Education Center, that I think highlights a lot of the details and a lot of the logic behind it and why it makes sense and how it can really increase the market. But as I mentioned, Sweden's been a really big one. It was 25% up to $1,100. But that was one of the largest allocations, specifically of $118 million. You can see that's a significant amount of money. California, actually, there has been something proposed. As I mentioned, this SB 400, but that's like more of a limited program. As far as just expanding the electric car rebate program or something similar, California, they were proposing to allocate around $10 million towards this program and to give up to $1,000 for e-bikes, and actually they'll also give $500 for regular bikes, provided that you're using them for transportation, which is pretty nice. Some other just notable programs, Scotland had an interesting program where they provide an interest-free loan with a cap up to $3,900 to purchase an electric bike, which I thought that was pretty cool. That's a nice program to introduce, and maybe that's something that we could see here. I think that could be helpful. I guess the one other smaller one that I'm familiar with personally, just because not too far from there in Long Beach, Go Active SGV, that used to be Bike SGV, San Gabriel Valley in California. They actually wrote, I guess, for a grant, and they got $70,000, and I think they put $700 towards the purchase of electric bike, and I think they got 100 people were able to get an electric bike under this program. And I know actually some of those people, it's pretty cool to see the adoption there. I should just note, these guys, if you ever want to check out a really cool bike advocacy group, Go Active SGV, really awesome what they're doing, and I've had the pleasure of meeting them. They actually started this group as a Facebook group, and then they grew it from there, and now they have 13 or 14 employees last time I checked. And, they're a nonprofit. They're really doing great things as far as bike advocacy. I mean, here in New York, we have several different groups. One of the largest is Transportation Alternatives, and they have several people on staff and many volunteers, and they really make a big difference. So having these local advocacy groups really helps. Well, I think that's all I want to cover on this. To start to cover on this, I really want to create this video more as a discussion, as a starting place, and we can use the comments and maybe interact and communicate and talk about it. What do you guys think? Do you think that these programs make sense? Do you feel like this will be helpful? Do you have any other ideas of how we can implement these programs, encourage legislators to introduce these things? From my side, I think that it could be very beneficial. I think it's already been proven. I mean, in Europe, they've been very successful. I think some of the other things I'd like to see as well is this leasing program. I think this could be really helpful. Overall, I think we're moving in the right direction, but I think that more awareness and more discussions on these topics and more advocacy is only going to help. So if you have any questions, comments, ideas, reach out. Always happy to help, and I'm excited about this and excited to be in this position to help communicate on these different topics. And I look forward to seeing you guys in a future video. Well, see you soon.